We're not on yet.
Let me just see.
You're slick. You investors in hate.
We are beginning the program. We're just trying to connect with our guests, so bear our talk over. Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Heroes and Patriots is a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. And today is Thursday, August 31st, 2023. And we are very glad that all of you have joined us. It's 9 o'clock on the West Coast, 12 noon on the East. I'm Mary Massey, and here with me is my terrific, handsome co-host.
Wow, that's the first time you've ever said that.
Well, you're still handsome. You've always been handsome.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, thank you for listening to our audience, listening to the broadcast here in Northern California, and to our national and international audience listening to the web stream live throughout the world. I want to encourage all the organizations and agencies that do classified work in the area of national security to email questions to Dr. Loeb during the show. I realize that you can't speak on the record if you aren't retired, but I can read your questions anonymously to Dr. Loeb, and he'll try to answer them. This is a very rare opportunity to speak to directly to someone I consider to be the world's top UFO expert. Speak to him directly, ask questions, and again, all the agencies and all the alphabet agencies that we contacted. Again, keeping in mind that the focus of our show is on national security. All those companies in the InQtel portfolio, please email your questions to me, and I'll relay them to Dr. Loeb.
Thank you, John. Today's program will be archived at kmud.org and our program website, heroespatriots.org, plus social media. I want to mention that all of the programs that we've done on KMUD since 2019 are available at our website. They appear in different places on YouTube, but they're all succinctly done by year on our website. So that's heroespatriots.org. As she mentioned, Dorothy Schaefer is our engineer this morning. Views and opinions expressed by our speakers are not necessarily those of the board, staff, underwriters, members, and volunteers of KMUD. Equal time will be made available for differences of opinions. And I want to remind our listeners, as well as emailing, they can call in to speak with Dr. Avi Loeb at 707-923-3911. We do ask that you remain on topic. If you have a different opinion, that's great, but let's be talking about our topic. And for the next hour, John and I will be speaking with Professor Avi Loeb. Professor Loeb is the chief scientist at Harvard University, the Department of Astrophysics, and he, along with expedition leader Rob McCallum of IOS Expeditions, retrieved hundreds of metallic spheres throughout thought to be unmatched to any existing alloys in our solar system from the seafloor of the Pacific Ocean near Papua New Guinea. So that's exciting. I also want to mention that when he was on our show last time, we talked about the Galileo project. And I know that he'll refresh our memories as to what that is. But briefly, it's an international scientific research project to systematically search for extraterrestrial intelligence or technology on and near Earth, and to identify the nature of anomalous, unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP. That's the new handle on that.
Well, and also since we've had Dr. Loeb on the show this summer, we had very important congressional hearings on unidentified, well, they don't call them unidentified flying objects anymore. They call them unidentified aerial phenomenon. But two naval aviators and a third witness from the intelligence community, all three with top secret security clearances, testified openly before a Congressional Oversight Committee on the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena. And what they said just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And that's what they said in the open hearing. In the closed hearing that was classified, I'm sure they just blew the minds of the Congress people who heard the testimony.
Yeah, this has never been done before. I also, don't let me forget to say that Dr. Loeb has a new book coming out in 2 or 3 days called Interstellar, The Search for Extraterrestrial Life and Our Future in the Stars. And he is a best-selling New York Times author, Extraterrestrial. So, Dr. Loeb, have you joined us?
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Oh, we are so delighted, and we know you're a busy guy these days, having just completed the expedition and reporting all your findings. Would you just start off by reminding our listeners why and how you began the Galileo project, and then we'll look more specifically at your June expedition.
Yeah, so back in June 2021, a couple of years ago, the Director of National Intelligence delivered a report to the US Congress about unidentified aerial phenomena, which now is called unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP.
Oh, okay.
Objects that cannot be identified, that military personnel and intelligence agencies see in their data. And a month later, I decided to lead the Galileo project based on private donations to my research account. A few multi-billionaires showed up in the porch of my home after my previous book appeared, Extraterrestrial, and provided funds. And I decided to use them for that purpose of clarifying what these unidentified objects might be. And in difference from the reports that were discussed by Avril Haines, the Director of National Intelligence, we wanted to do a systematic study of the sky, not anecdotal, because these reports came from people who were at the right place at the right time. But the proper way to deal with that is using instruments that are fully calibrated, under our control, not on a jittery cockpit, and seeing, first of all, what are the common objects like balloons, drones, airplanes, that, or even birds that you see in the sky. And then these are regarded as the background, and one would like to see if there is anything else that perhaps is not from this earth. But you need to do a systematic study, not anecdotal, in order to figure out if there is anything unusual. And that we started in July 2021, and by now we have an observatory operating at Harvard University that is looking at the sky 24/7 and collecting data in the infrared, optical, radio, and audio. And that data is being analyzed by machine learning software that tries to check if there is anything that is not familiar in the sky. Within government, a year after the first report, there was a second report talking about this, and a new office was established called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO. And the director of that office gave some testimonies recently saying that indeed, when they look back at these reports they had from within government, most of them have mundane explanations. So only a few % of these objects appear unidentified, truly anomalous. So, that's the work of course, the government to figure out if there is any national security risk associated with, for example, spy balloons that were shot down. And then as a scientist, for me, I'm the work of a scientist is complementary to that, because I don't care about anything that was made on this earth. If it says made in China, I would be happy to deliver that information, the data to government. That's not of interest to me. As a scientist, I care whether there's anything beyond this earth. And so that's the Galileo project. We have one observatory. We are planning to make 5 copies of it in the coming year, and more, up to 100 copies, place them in various locations across the US. And we have also another branch of the Galileo project that is related to an expedition that I led just a couple of months ago,
Right.
and we just reported the results from, and we can talk more about that expedition to retrieve materials from the first interstellar object that was recognized almost a decade ago by U.S. Government satellites. It was a fireball from a meteor, a very fast-moving object that collided with Earth, and we can talk more about it. It could have been technologically manufactured because it was moving very fast and had unusual material strength relative to the known rocks that collide with Earth every now and then.
Yeah, Dr. Loeb, let's talk about that object, but also let's talk about the asteroid. I hope I have the pronunciation right. The Oumuamua.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's how you first came to I want to say national attention in your belief that that this was not an asteroid. You didn't know quite what it was, but you knew what it wasn't. And the name of the asteroid, which I'm having trouble pronouncing, is Hawaiian for messenger from afar arriving first.
Yeah.
That's how it literally translates. It was flat. It was anomalous. It was not aerodynamic, if you think of asteroids as being aerodynamic. So what was it? What attracted your curiosity? And how did you follow up?
Yeah, so this other object did not collide with Earth. It was spotted on October 19th, 2017 by a telescope in Hawaii called Pan-STARRS. And it was the size of a football field and reflected the sunlight. And that's how it was detected. And at first, of course, everyone thought it's a rock, but it was moving faster than the escape speed from the solar system. So it was definitely from outside the solar system. That's the first reported astronomical object found in the vicinity of Earth from outside the solar system. And that's why it attracted some attention. For me, the mere discovery of this object was a surprise because a decade earlier, I wrote a paper calculating how many rocks we should expect in our vicinity from other stars. The number was not promising. This telescope should not have detected anything, yet it did. And that was intriguing for me because when you make a mistake in your expectation, that's an opportunity to learn something new.
Right.
So this object was anomalous, as you pointed out. It was flat in its shape based on the reflection of sunlight. It was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force, non-gravitational force, and it didn't show any cometary evaporation. There was no gas or dust around it, so it couldn't have benefited from the rocket effect. And I suggested that it's just the reflection of sunlight that is pushing it. And actually, 3 years later, there was another object discovered with the same qualities. It was given the name 2020 SO. It was pushed away from the sun by reflection of sunlight, no cometary evaporation. And then within a few weeks, the astronomers realized, oh, this one is actually a rocket booster that was launched by NASA in 1966. And it had thin walls made of stainless steel. And that's why it did not evaporate. And because of the thinness of the walls, it was pushed by reflecting sunlight. And so here is a technological object. We know that because we made it. The question is, who made Oumuamua?
Right. So what are your thoughts?
Okay, so we didn't have enough opportunity to study it, to image it, or to get close to it, or get more information about it. By now, it's too faint.
Yeah.
The way I think about it is, it could have been just like this rocket boosters, some device that is not functioning anymore, or a surface layer of a bigger object, a spacecraft. Or it could have been a broken piece of some mega structure that an advanced civilization created. Because 60 years ago, Freeman Dyson thought about what is now called Dyson sphere, that an advanced civilization will surround its host star by a sphere that harvests the energy from the star. The Earth is intercepting only one part in 100 million of the energy from the sun. And of course, we can do much better, and that's what Freeman Dyson imagined. But the thing is that the sun will eventually evolve by becoming brighter. And as a result, if there was any such megastructure, it could break it apart. And it's very difficult to engineer a solid structure, but one can imagine having tiles, each of them like a kite floating and being pushed out by radiation pressure from the star that balances gravity. But once the star evolves and becomes brighter, it will break it apart. And one of these pieces could be Oumuamua. I mean, there are many such possibilities. The problem is we just didn't have enough data.
Right.
So I'm intrigued enough to continue the research on this subject. And within a year, we will have a new observatory in Chile called the Rubin Observatory that will likely be much more sensitive than the one in Hawaii, and could find several such Oumuamua-like objects every year. So I very much look forward to that.
Dr. Loeb, we already have a question from a caller, and you may not agree with the premise. If UFOs are so technologically advanced, and you can answer that, why do they keep crashing?
So there are two types of technological gadgets that one can imagine. One is similar to the probes that we send to interstellar space. That's Voyager 1, Voyager 2, Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, and New Horizons. We sent 5 of them over the past half century that will exit the solar system. But it will take them 10,000 years to exit the Oort cloud, the outskirts of the solar system. And by that time, they will not be functional anymore. So effectively, what we did is pollute interstellar space with space trash. Just, these would be just objects that are not functioning, floating through interstellar space. And so that's one type of objects that you can imagine, because we send them. And I call that space trash. And those would crash on Earth, obviously, because the Earth depending on how many of them there are per unit volume, every now and then, one of them will collide with Earth. And you can think of those as just like plastics in the ocean. They accumulate over time, over billions of years, when civilizations keep throwing such probes to space, to interstellar space, and those are bound by gravity to the Milky Way. They don't escape. They don't move fast enough to escape the Milky Way. So they keep accumulating. And, there might be some population of those, and every now and then one of them collides with Earth. So when you say, why is there a crash? Well, obviously, if it's space trash, it will crash into Earth. And just think about Voyager colliding with a planet 1 billion years from now, far away. It will appear as a meteor crashing and producing a fireball of unusual material strength, because it's made of stainless steel, and also unusual speed because it benefited from artificial propulsion to start with. So that's actually exactly what this first interstellar meteor looked like when we analyzed the US government data that was publicized by NASA. It looked like the object, this first interstellar meteor, was tougher than all the space rocks that were identified over the past decade, 272 of them. And it also moved very fast. Outside the solar system, it was moving faster than 95% of the stars in the vicinity of the sun. So that's what I call space trash. And obviously, trash has no brain.
Right.
It used to. It might have had.
Might have had a brain.
Yeah, just like Voyager had some capabilities to start with, but now,
right.
10,000 years from now, it's nothing.
Well, that helps explain.
So that's one type, and then the second type of technological objects in space would be functional. They were designed well enough so that they do have a brain, like artificial intelligence. And they could be functional when they arrive to Earth. Those would not crash, okay? They might if they have an accident, or if some military, a fighter jet pilot fires at them and brings them down. That can happen. But, we don't know if such things exist, and there was a hearing in the US House of Representatives about such objects. Two pilots provided testimonies, and in fact, the third eyewitness, David Grush, was talking about the retrieval and reverse engineering programs that the US government has based on conversations he had with 40 people. He did not see any materials, but that's what he said based on conversations. And of course, the US Congress can, in principle, contact the people that he spoke with and get to the bottom of it. We still don't know, and I haven't seen any evidence that implies that this story is not fabricated. And until I see the evidence, I would not necessarily believe it. That's why I went to the Pacific Ocean to retrieve the fragments from the crash site of the first interstellar meteor, because it's possible we will learn about such materials from the bottom of the Pacific Ocean before we learn anything new from politicians in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, we'll get back to David Grush in a minute and what your thoughts are, because this guy was no fool. He's got a top secret, beyond top secret security clearance. It took me 9 months to get my security clearance. I can't even imagine the vetting that guy had to go through.
No, I'm not raising any doubts about his integrity or about his ability to learn about information that is classified. I'm just saying that he did not witness what he's talking about.
Right.
So when you hear other people telling you stories, the question is, are the stories correct? That has nothing to do with the integrity of the person who listens to the stories. He
Correct.
can listen to the story and be very sincere in saying, these people told me that.
Right.
He's completely correct. They told him that. The question is whether what they told him is real or it's fabricated. That's the fundamental question. It has nothing to do with the credentials of David Grush. He's just telling you that what other people told him, but that may be completely fabricated.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Let's talk about the breaking news. What did you discover in offshore?
June?
Yeah, in June, offshore Australia.
It was actually closer to Papua New Guinea, about 90 kilometers from Papua New Guinea. That's where the meteor, the first interstellar meteor, exploded about a decade ago on January 8th, 2014. The fireball that was generated by its friction on air carried a few percent of the Hiroshima atomic bomb energy and was spotted by US government satellites, and they measured the speed of the object, and the speed was well above the escape speed from the solar system. So once again, just like with Oumuamua, in this case, this is an interstellar object, and it preceded the Oumuamua by almost 4 years. And so that's really the first one that was recognized by humans. And I realized that 5 years later, when we looked through this catalog with my student and found this meteor to be above the escape speed from the sun. And then the US Space Command, 3 years later, in 2022, confirmed this conclusion in an official letter to NASA, that at the 99.99%, this object came from outside the solar system. Mm-hmm. And they also provided the light curve of the explosion. And at that point, I decided to lead an expedition that would go to the Pacific Ocean, that location. The DoD uncertainty provided a region of about 11 kilometers or 7 miles on a side. So we were out to survey a region 7 miles in size. The ocean depth is more than a mile, and we were looking for the molten droplets from the surface of this meteor when it was exposed to the immense heat from the fireball that surrounded it. And amazingly, we were looking for millimeter-sized particles at a depth of a mile across a region of 7 miles. And it sounds like a hopeless mission, but we used a magnetic sled with magnets on both sides and skimmed the surface of the ocean floor and attracted magnetic particles. And among them, we found by now 700 tiny droplets, spherules, metallic marbles, the size of a grain of sand, roughly a millimeter.
Wow.
Each of them is a milligram. And we analyzed them at Harvard University. And what we found is tantalizing. We analyzed only 57 of them so far, and we found an excess of these spherules relative to the background. We also visited control regions far away. So there was an excess of those along the meteor path. We found them concentrated there. And those excess droplets had a composition that is very distinct, very different from all materials retrieved from the solar system. You don't find such a composition on Earth, the Moon, or Mars, or on any rocks within the solar system. And just to give you a flavor of what we found is an enhancement in the abundance of beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium. These are three elements by factors of hundreds, up to 1,000, in some spherules that were found near the meteor site. And we therefore called this unique composition that is not mentioned in the scientific literature, we called it Belau, because to represent beryllium, lanthanum, and uranium. And it's not clear what can make such a composition where you have up to 1,000 times more uranium than you find in the materials that made the solar system in terms of concentration. And one possibility is that it originated from a planet that had a magma ocean. It had the molten rock and an iron core. Under these circumstances, and by the way, the Earth started this way. The Earth had a magma ocean and iron core. Under these circumstances, some elements sink down because they are attracted chemically to iron. They sink into the core, and they leave behind other elements that make up the crust. And those are similar to the type of elements that we found enhanced. So maybe it came from the crust of a magma ocean. But there is a challenge there because you need a lot of these objects per star. You need 10 to the power 23, and it's not clear how you make so many of them per star. Then another possibility is that it came from material that was ejected by an exploding star. And those are, that usually is enriched by heavy elements, but not the same as the elements we found, just a fraction of the elements we found. So there needs to be another source that complicates the picture. And finally, there is obviously the possibility that of a technological origin, something that originated from melting, for example, semiconductors, which have enrichment in those elements. So
it's unidentified, really. I mean, you're not sure yet, or are you?
That's right. We are not sure because in order to tell the difference between a natural origin and a technological one, the best thing to do is find a big piece of the object. And that would be the subject of a future expedition. If we find a piece, we can tell if it's a rock or a technological gadget, because the gadget could have buttons on it. And then the question would be, should we press a button?
So, Dr. Loeb, we're going to try to get you funding to follow up on these questions. Who are the likeliest sources of funding for you? Is it NASA? Is it DARPA? Is it MITRE? Is it somebody else? Where are you likely to get the funding to get the answers?
Well, so far I was funded by private donations.
Right.
And NASA has a study on the subject of UAP that we talked about before, supposed to release the results very soon. The question is whether the recommendations to study UAP will be associated with some funds for research. We shall see. That, of course, will dictate whether NASA supports the kind of endeavors that the Galileo project is doing. And the DoD is obviously another source, and obviously we will be very glad if there was an opportunity for us. We are applying to one of their grants very soon, within the coming month, and we hope to be evaluated and selected, but it's never guaranteed. And
who's we? You say we are applying. What is the entity? What's the name of the entity that's applying?
the name is the Galileo Project.
So it's under the auspices of Galileo. It's 31 minutes past the hour. I want to remind our listeners, this is Heroes and Patriots, and we are spending our hour with Dr. Avi Loeb, and we have two callers that we'd like to go ahead and get to. If Dorothy, if you give.
Just before we go to the caller, I want to clarify that actually it's me that is applying for these funds. So even though it's for the Galileo Project, they're all related to me, Avi Loeb. And if anyone is interested in contributing to the funding of the project, then they're welcome to approach me. My email address is on the web, and we will accept contributions very happily.
Thank you for clarifying. A caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Yes, Mr. Loeb, very nice to speak to you. I am Saj. I live in Shelter Cove. On August 8th, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I saw a meteor crash into the ocean. And I'm not sure if it was a meteor or a UAP or a drone, but it was huge and had a V-shaped tail. And it has also been corroborated supposedly by a man named Jake Olson. And I don't have the internet and I don't know how to do it, but I have been to Chile and I have been to Harvard University and I have been to I've studied astronomy before. I'm not that good at math. My husband was a Chilean who invented semiconductors.
And what is your
Isidoro
question?
Victor Rivas de Mujica. I'd like to have you check out at...
Okay, so I think we're on to the second caller. Am I right, Dorothy? Okay, go ahead, caller.
Yes, I hope. Thank you, Professor Loeb. My name is Pat, and I'm calling from a very windy place. I apologize. I want to just say how exhilarating the work is. And I, as a scientist, I am particularly thrilled with your scientific method and approach to evidence. And I'm wondering if you are, with this new frontier, if you are finding it's a way of bringing young people around the world into science and how you might use that to really open up new minds to this new frontier, including working with scientists from many other countries besides the U.S. and building this kind of global network of positive science.
Thank you, caller.
Yeah, so this is an excellent question. And during the expedition, for example, I wrote diary reports, 43 of them, and published them on medium.com. And they were read by millions of people around the world and translated to Spanish. And a lot of people wrote to me and said that they were really excited to see how science is done. And of course, that was a work in progress at the time when we were on the ship that was fittingly called Silver Star. And by now we have a paper that is finished, scientific paper that was submitted for publication. And so we just follow the scientific method of collecting the evidence and analyzing it. But during the process, I felt that it's important to show the public how science is done, because very often they see the final product, but that is not as exciting as seeing the process, just like a detective story that at first you might not realize what you are about to find, and sometimes you make mistakes along the way. That's human. It's a human activity. And I think the public deserves to know that scientists do not always know the right answer and in fact make mistakes along the way. And ultimately it's the evidence that guides us. Right. And so in addition to that, of course, I'm using it as a teaching moment to my colleagues, because many of them have very strong opinions and are not seeking the evidence. They just say, we know the answer to be this and that, and anything else would be an extraordinary claim. And I want to show them that we should not have a prejudice. We should be open-minded and just seek the evidence rather than claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. My point is, extraordinary evidence require extraordinary funding and require lots of effort. Right. And it's really hard work to get the evidence. So it's easy to have a circular argument where you argue, well, we don't have any evidence, and then you're not seeking it, and you never know anything. But the way science is gaining new knowledge is by people getting funded and investing their best efforts to seek the evidence. And no evidence falls in your lap. When Enrico Fermi asked, where is everybody talking about extraterrestrials? He didn't do anything. He didn't look through telescopes. He didn't search. And only over the past decade, we had the opportunity to discover the first interstellar objects, the meteor I mentioned, and Oumuamua. So I think we are embarking on a new frontier that was never attempted before. And that's why I led this expedition, to show that by collecting evidence, by taking risks, we can discover something new. And it's also a lesson for my colleagues who have very strong opinions and do not want to engage in this research. But coming back to the question, I do believe that young scientists, they will carry the torch of science in the future, and they are open-minded. So a lot of them are involved in the Galileo project. And for example, I have 2 postdocs who told me that before the project was established, this was their highest passion, to be involved in a project like that. There was nothing. And then when I established the project and offered them the job, they were thrilled to join it. So I think there is a large silent majority of young people very excited about this subject, but they are not engaged in it because a lot of the senior people make derogatory remarks, or they regard it as inappropriate or ridicule it. There is a stigma which needs to be removed, because the public cares about whether we are alone. The government now cares about the question of whether there are extraterrestrial gadgets near Earth. And so it's the civil duty of scientists to try and address this question and shed more light on the nature of UAP, on the nature of those interstellar objects that I was talking about.
Before we get on to a question here from the Princeton Institute of Advanced Study, I want to make 2 comments about the caller's question. Dr. Loeb is a mensch. I don't know how else to put it. When I asked him if my 9-year-old granddaughter Stella could meet with him at Harvard and encourage her in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math, he immediately agreed. He wants to see more girls and more women in the STEM disciplines. The other thing I would say is, one of the things that really heartened me was seeing Dr. Loeb's team in pulling that magnetic sled
in the expedition
off of Papua New Guinea.
Yeah,
and they're all young people.
They're very young.
They're all young people. So that Dr. Loeb, and I think this is one of his greatest professional achievements, is not just the work that he does in astrophysics and in unidentified anomalous objects, but he's mentoring a whole new generation of researchers. And I think that should not go unnoticed. So congratulations to you, sir, for the work you're doing.
Thank you. When I went to the expedition, we went there with a private jet of the donor. And when I entered the plane, the pilot said, "Welcome aboard, Professor Loeb." And I said, "No need for titles with me, because I'm a curious farm boy. I was born on a farm, and I'm still like a kid trying to figure out what I see around me." And that basically defines me. I refuse to become the adult in the room that knows everything in advance. Right. I want to figure it out based on evidence.
Well, Stella and I will get to your office on my next trip to the Boston area for sure.
John, you have we have about 20 minutes left for the show. So what's that next question?
So this is a tough one, Dr. Loeb. You were a distinguished fellow at the Institute for Advanced Study. I've spent a little time there at Princeton, and this is a great question, and it goes to the work of another distinguished fellow at the Institute, Isaac Bars. one of the very few Jewish
Or
Isaac bars. I'm sorry, Isaac bars.
Yeah, it's like
one of the very few Jewish Turkish mathematicians in the world, and he has done very exciting work on what he calls the two-dimension theory of time. And I'll just run through that really quickly. Humans normally perceive physical reality as four-dimensional, three-dimensional space, up, down, back, forward, side to side, and one-dimensional time, past and future. But Isaac Bars' theory proposes a six-dimensional universe composed of four-dimensional space and two-dimensional time. And without getting into the weeds, this question is coming from the Institute. Is Dr. Loeb not just looking for evidence of unidentified aerial phenomenon or anomalous phenomena coming from the four-dimensional construct, but actually coming from interdimensional space?
Well, that's an interesting, very interesting question. I actually thought about having time carry more than one dimension. It's not clear. I mean, there is no good theory that accommodates such a structure. There are lots of discussions in the scientific literature about the extraspatial dimensions. They're skipping time as one-dimensional. And that's the way physics is more easily formulated. It doesn't mean that reality is like that. And I would be very curious to learn if anyone is working on that and what do they find. I mean, there are a few papers, very small number of papers that dealt with it. There are all kinds of issues with having more than one time dimension. But I will not get into them. I mean, obviously you don't want to have situations where, you go back in time and create a logical inconsistency, like you go back and you kill your grandparents, and then how would you logically exist if that were the case? And so there are some issues with that, but anyway, I think it's a very interesting question of whether, we keep adding spatial dimensions and thinking that will be the way. That's what string theory is doing in trying to unify quantum mechanics and gravity, but not much attention is given to having more than one time dimension. And I do think it's very interesting to explore that. And perhaps, it's possible that once we explore that, we'll realize that we can solve some of the puzzles, because one of the biggest puzzles that we have for almost a century now is the meaning of quantum mechanics. We don't really fundamentally understand. Einstein had a problem with that. He said that, this theory cannot have spooky action at a distance. There must be, but then he was proven wrong on that, because there were experiments and the Nobel Prize was awarded for quantum entanglement. So at a fundamental level, it feels counterintuitive that you can have an entity like an electron in many different places at the same time, and then once you measure it at one point, everywhere else that knowledge is known. It cannot be anywhere else. So there is some action at a distance, and that is not understood at the fundamental level. And perhaps what we are missing, and that's also a key to unifying quantum mechanics and gravity. Perhaps it is another time dimension, but I don't know. That was not explored much as of yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, in popular culture on the History Channel, probably the most popular show on the History Channel is the show on Skinwalker Ranch, where a leading astrophysicist from NASA is one of the experts on the show, is postulating that there is a portal about 1,500 feet above the ranch through which unidentified anomalous phenomena are coming and going. It's a very popular show. There is a lot of unexplained phenomenon, and the whole idea of a portal or a stargate, goes all the way back to ancient Egypt.
Right.
So there's a lot of interest in this theory.
Right, but at the end, it boils down to the evidence. And,
right.
So far, I haven't seen a conclusive data coming from there. So I would like to see that data, the evidence. That's what we are trying to do with the Galileo project. So everything is possible.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. We have another 15 or so minutes, and we're still taking calls at 707-937-3911. I wanted to shift a little bit. You mentioned that there will be a new observatory, telescope, etc., placed in South America in the near future. I was reading about the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope that China is putting in place, and I'm not sure if they've completed it or it's almost to be completed. Could you talk about that and what its role, if any, or would there be any parallel interest for you there in building?
Yeah. So obviously, such missions are driven by national pride, and they want to promote the excellence in science and technology in terms of China pioneering new scientific endeavors, and part of that is in space. And obviously, the entire scientific community worldwide would benefit from any new telescope in space, because the data will be shared. There is, of course, a second component to the activity in space that China has, which has to do with spy satellites and national security. That, of course, is a matter that politicians should worry about. But for science, it's always beneficial to have more advanced telescopes, especially in space. So I welcome that a lot. As to the capabilities of the instrument they will send, I mean, it has to be compared to those that were launched by NASA, such as the Webb telescope or the Hubble Space Telescope, and there are X-ray telescopes like Chandra and the other instruments that were sent. And we still have to wait and see how competitive would be this new telescope that China is planning. One thing they did was the US had a radio telescope, the biggest in the world, 300 meters in diameter in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, and it collapsed, unfortunately, and is not being used anymore. China, on the other hand, developed a bigger radio telescope, 500 meters in diameter, and it's brand new and it's operating for a couple of years now. And it's unfortunate that the U.S. is losing leadership in having the biggest radio telescope in the world. So that was funded by the National Science Foundation, and then they gave up on reestablishing this telescope. And I think we should all be worried if the U.S. loses its leadership in the world. It happened before in the context of the Large Hadron Collider, where CERN, the European consortium that the US partners with, but it's not inside the US territory. That represents the frontier of smashing particles at very high energies. And there used to be another project in the US that was initially funded, but then the Congress decided not to fund it anymore, and that's called the Superconducting Super Collider. And the US lost its leadership because politicians decided not to fund the Superconducting Super Collider, so then Europe is now leading. And I'm just worried that on many different fronts, we are losing leadership. And we need, it's really important that science and technology will be developed by the US as the leader, because it also leads to applications that are used for national security eventually. And so I think more funds need to go to science and technology than currently are allocated.
Dr. Loeb, we have another phone call from a listener. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question.
Okay, it's me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't have a question. I just wanted to state a few things because I was stimulated by what's being said here, and like primarily anything is possible. You said it. It's not possible to know what is possible, and I feel that we are so limited by long-held beliefs, centuries of false information, and so I feel that needs to be cleared out, and then we'll see the facts.
Dr. Loeb?
Yeah. So the approach that I take is that first we need to find those objects that represent something we don't know. Okay, so the way to find them is to look for anything we see in the sky, for example, and see whether there is anything other than birds and technological devices that we produce, like balloons, drones, airplanes, things that are familiar, without assuming anything, without claiming anything, until we see something really unusual. And by the way, a lot of people say, oh, when we have crappy data, it's not clear, the image is fuzzy, oh, it may be new physics. Well, to argue for new physics, you really need exquisite data, because you have to realize that physicists are working around the clock in many collaborations to find new physics. They haven't done so, for decades in terms of something completely out, that was never anticipated. And it's really a lot of hard work. And many people in the public say, oh, I believe it's new physics, but that's not the way to find new physics. You really need exquisite data with the best instruments that one can use, that are under full control, that we fully understand. Only then we can start saying, oh, we know the distance of this object, we know the speed that it was moving at, we know the acceleration, we know perhaps how it looked like, and we can say with confidence that it doesn't represent physics as we know it. That's the only way to find new physics reliably. Mm-hmm. So I would caution against speculating about time machines, or about all kinds of wormholes or other things. There was a group of people documented in a documentary who were claiming, oh, look at this, look at the sky, it looks like there is a hole in the sky, maybe it's a wormhole. Well, that was just a hole in between two clouds, and that's a meteorological, you can't really argue for a wormhole unless you have very sophisticated instruments to see it. So that's what I'm warning against. But other than that, there may be things that cannot be explained by the known physics, definitely. But to find them, we really need to do a very systematic study with instruments that we fully understand.
Right. John, you have our last question?
Yeah. Well, we've got a two-part question here. And Dr. Loeb, I have more than 100 questions that have been emailed in, but I'm cherry picking some in the general area of where do we go from here. So can you, are you able to identify the billionaire that funded your work? That's one part of the question. And
yes. There were first. Let me answer that. There were several of them, but if you ask about the expedition, that was $1.5 million, and that expedition was funded by Charles Hoskinson. And by the way, there was a New York Times Magazine profile of me this past weekend, the 27th of August. And if you go there, you'll see several of the names of those who funded me. That was a very extensive profile in the New York Times Magazine that appears on Sunday.
We get the New York Times.
We do.
We do get the I'm New embarrassed York to say I didn't read through it all.
We haven't read it yet.
We haven't read it yet.
Check it out, and you will see a large article about my work.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations. So the second part of this question is it goes to research in the area of unidentified anomalous phenomena being an opportunity for diplomacy and peace. What are the opportunities for the three great superpowers, the United States, China, and Russia, working together to do research in this area? Scientists are apolitical, or they should be apolitical. What is the opportunity for science scientists, researchers such as yourself, to lead the way to joint research on something that infects the entire planet. The possibility that we're not alone.
Yeah, I completely agree. This subject should bring people together, because anything that came from interstellar space, first of all, the journey took a long time, millions to billions of years, and that's before humans existed on Earth. So whatever arrives at our doorstep probably did not have us in mind. So the divisions we have among nations are completely irrelevant. The sender did not care about how we split the land on this rock. That is irrelevant. And that makes it scientific. Science is engaged with the universe and trying to uncover information that should be shared by all humans. So in that context, I think there should be scientific collaboration. The only complication is that when you examine objects in the sky, very often these objects are related to national security, like the Chinese spy balloon that was spotted.
Right.
So if you are monitoring the sky and collecting data, often governments care about what this data contains for national security purposes. So then the question arises, could they partner with scientists? But if this is done just by scientists, to start with, the sensors are not classified, the sky is not classified. So I do believe that, we can partner as scientists without involving the politicians.
Very good. Well, our time is over. We so thank you for being our guest for the last hour. Dr. Avi Loeb, Harvard University astrophysicist, co-founder, of the Galileo Project, and now
the author of 8 books, over 800 peer-reviewed research papers, and in my view, the leading UFO expert in the world. We'd like to plug the book one more time, Mary.
Well, I want to plug his New York Times best-selling one was Extraterrestrial, so that's still available. And his new book, Interstellar, The Search for Extraterrestrial Life in Our Future and Our Future in the Stars. I love that. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been so exciting and informative, and we hope to have you come back if there's a new development on this particular expedition or something new.
And again, Dr. Loeb, thank you for appearing on our show a second time. We interview a lot of guests, A-list guests in the area of national security, intelligence operations, and foreign policy. But I think the work you're doing is perhaps the most exciting.
Well, and so does our government.
Yeah, and so does our government. What could be more exciting than discovering, hey, we're not alone? Thank you, Dr. Loeb.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Have a good day.